2 years had passed since Ben Walker retired from the police force. He could never forget that last day, the day he saw Coda for the final time. Coda, the German shepherd who had been his partner for years. Their bond went beyond duty, stronger than friendship alone. That dog was half of his soul. After Ben's retirement, Coda was assigned to a new handler. Ben understood that it was protocol, but his heart never found peace. Every day was a torment. He tried to fill the emptiness with new hobbies, taking walks in the parks they used to frequent, but Coda's shadow was always there, in every corner, every path. That morning, a phone call from an animal shelter changed everything. A weary voice on the other end told him they had just received a German shepherd, extremely anxious and refusing to eat. The dog's name was Coda. Ben's heart seemed to stop. 2 years, 2 long years of longing, and now a chance to see him again, even if only from afar. Without a second thought, Ben sped toward the animal shelter, a 2-hour drive away. His car cut through the busy streets, but his mind focused on one thing: Coda. Would Coda remember him? Would the dog recognize his voice and touch after all this time? Anxiety and overwhelming hope battled inside him. When he arrived, the place looked grim. Moss covered the walls, and the air was damp. A shelter worker led him to a cage in the corner of the room. "The dog is very scared," the worker whispered. "He won't let anyone get close." Ben nodded, holding his breath as he approached. There, behind the cold metal bars, crouched a thin dog, his eyes vacant and full of fear. It was Coda. The dog he knew, but not the same. Those eyes, once shining with intelligence and loyalty, were now filled with terror. Ben didn't dare step closer, afraid of startling him. He just stood there, staring at the dog that had saved his life countless times. At that moment, a voice behind him shattered the silence. "Who are you?" it said, cold and sharp. Ben turned to see a muscular man wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face, standing in the doorway, watching him intently. Ben turned, meeting the eyes of the man at the doorway. "I'm Ben Walker," he said, his voice calm. "I'm this dog's former handler." The man stepped closer, his movements heavy, his gaze unfriendly. "I know who you are," he said. "And I know who this dog is. He's never been good since he arrived here. Found on a road, almost starved to death, filthy." Ben's heart sank. He had never imagined that Coda, the loyal, well-trained dog, would end up like this. "What happened to him?" Ben asked, his voice catching. The man shrugged. "The people who handed him over didn't care. They said this dog was too much trouble. They didn't even want to look back." He stopped in front of Coda's cage, looking at the dog with a cold expression. "This dog seems to have been abused. Look at his eyes. There's no joy left in them, only fear." Ben knelt in front of the cage, extending his hand slowly. He didn't try to touch Coda, only letting the dog sniff his scent. "Coda, it's me," he whispered, his voice heavy with emotion. "It's Ben." Coda let out a soft snort. His dim eyes shifted, glancing at Ben's hand for a brief moment before returning to the vacant stare. A faint flicker seemed to pass through his eyes, as if a small memory was trying to surface, but it quickly vanished. The walls of fear that had imprisoned his soul were too thick. "He doesn't even recognize you," the man said, his tone mocking. "Better leave him here. He's too broken now." Ben's hand trembled. He ignored the man's words. He saw Coda's suffering, and he would not abandon him. "I'm taking him home," Ben said, his voice firm now. The man laughed bitterly. "You think it's that easy? This dog needs more than love. He needs a miracle." "Then I'll give him that miracle," Ben replied, meeting the man's gaze without flinching. "I'll take him home. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back his trust. I'll do anything." The adoption process was far from easy. The man behind the desk, who introduced himself as the shelter manager, looked at Ben with suspicion. "You'll need to fill all of this out, and I have to warn you," he said, pointing to a stack of forms, "this dog's case is very sensitive." He's already rejected 2 handlers who tried to adopt him. Ben filled out the forms with trembling hands. Every question felt like a test of his sincerity. The shelter manager pressed on, asking for minute details, Ben's work history, why he hadn't taken Coda immediately upon retirement. Ben answered patiently, explaining police procedures and the unbreakable bond between him and Coda. He glanced back toward the cage, where Coda remained curled up, refusing to look at anyone. 30 minutes later, the manager set his pen down. "You can take him," he said, his tone flat. "But don't say I didn't warn you. This dog is a serious challenge. Many people have returned him here." Ben didn't care. He nodded, thanked the man, and returned quickly to Coda's cage. He unlocked the gate and called Coda's name softly. The dog didn't move. Ben had to approach slowly, fitting a new leash around Coda's neck, guiding him outside. Coda walked with his head lowered, body tense, as if every step was torture. Outside, the cold air cut through to the bone. Ben led Coda to his car parked across the street. The dog still showed no sign of recognition. Ben opened the car door, and with a gentle push, Coda climbed into the back seat. Ben closed the door, slid into the driver's seat, and took a deep breath. He glanced in the rearview mirror, and there, at the doorway of the shelter, he saw the silhouette of the manager. The man stood silently, staring at Ben's car. His gaze was blank, yet unreadable, a mix of cynicism and something darker. Ben ignored him and started the engine. "We're going home, buddy," Ben whispered to Coda, though he knew the dog didn't understand. "We're going home, and everything will be all right." Despite his words, Ben knew the road ahead would not be easy. He was not just bringing home a dog, but a wounded soul filled with trauma. He drove forward, eyes fixed on the road, with Coda sitting behind him, still frozen in cold silence. The drive home felt endless. Ben stole glances at Coda through the rearview mirror from time to time. The dog remained curled up, his head pressed against the seat, as if trying to disappear from the world. At a busy street corner, as they passed a park, Ben saw a little boy playing with his dog. The dog ran joyfully, chasing a ball, leaping with excitement. Ben imagined how happy Coda must have been back then, running and playing with him. When they finally arrived home, Ben turned off the engine. He stepped out, opened the back door, and guided Coda out. The dog hesitated but eventually followed Ben's lead. They walked slowly toward the front door. Ben opened the house that had felt empty for 2 long years, letting Coda enter first. Coda paused at the threshold, sniffing the air, his eyes moving slowly as he examined every corner of the room. Ben noticed a subtle change in Coda's expression. It was no longer the vacant stare he had seen at the shelter, but a gaze filled with confusion. Coda sniffed the living room carpet, then moved cautiously toward a small cabinet in the corner. Ben followed, puzzled. Coda sniffed in front of the cabinet, then stood upright, his tail trembling slightly. Ben opened the cabinet. Inside hung an old collar, faded and torn, but still intact. It was the collar Coda had worn when they were partners. Beside it lay a red rubber ball, once Coda's favorite toy. Ben picked up the collar and ball. "Here," he whispered to Coda. "Do you remember this, buddy?" Coda snorted softly. He stared at the collar, then looked back at Ben, as if trying to understand. The flicker in his eyes was clearer now, an unreadable emotion, a trace of memory. He didn't show excitement, but Ben could feel that something had shifted. The wall that had separated them, once impenetrable, was slowly beginning to crack. Ben placed the ball on the floor. Coda only stared, unmoving. Ben picked up the ball again and tossed it gently. It rolled across the floor, stopping near Coda's feet. The dog didn't move, yet his gaze remained fixed on it. Suddenly, a voice from outside the window shattered the silence. "Watch out!" someone shouted. Ben turned and saw a black car speeding down the street, nearly hitting a child. The car swerved quickly and vanished around a corner. Ben rushed to the window, checking to see if anyone was hurt. Nothing. The driver had just been reckless. Ben returned to the living room and saw Coda had curled up again in the corner behind the sofa. The rubber ball lay quietly beside him. A door to connection that had almost opened had closed once more. Coda still wasn't ready. Ben realized his rushed approach had been a mistake. He couldn't force Coda to remember. He had to be patient. That night, Ben prepared a bed on the living room floor, near the sofa where Coda had curled up. He didn't try to touch the dog. He just sat quietly and began to speak. "Do you remember, Coda?" Ben started, his voice low and gentle. "The first time we met? You were so small, a little clumsy. You couldn't even catch a ball properly." He smiled bitterly at the memory. "But I knew there was something special in you. Something beyond instinct. You have the soul of a warrior." He continued, recounting their missions together. Searching in cold forests, finding a lost child in the middle of a storm, and the pride he felt when Coda successfully subdued a criminal with nothing but a bark. He told every story, hoping his voice could pierce the thick wall of fear that had imprisoned Coda. Coda didn't move. The dog simply listened, though Ben couldn't tell if he truly understood. Ben also brought out other old items. He retrieved Coda's old K9 vest from the closet, still carrying the dog's scent, and placed it near the sofa. He laid down his work jacket, soaked with the scents of forest and sweat, hoping these familiar smells would awaken Coda's dormant memories. 4 days the routine repeated. Ben would sit, talk, and let Coda sniff the traces of the past. Slowly, imperceptible changes appeared. Coda no longer curled up in the corner. Sometimes he would lie down, ears flicking at the sound of Ben's voice. Occasionally, his eyes followed Ben's steps across the room. Small progress, yet progress nonetheless. One afternoon, as Ben sat on the back porch, he noticed something strange. The same black car he had seen the day they left the shelter was now creeping down the street, pausing briefly in front of his house before driving away. Ben's heart raced. He didn't know who was behind the wheel, but unease settled in his chest. That same strange feeling he had felt at the shelter returned. That night Ben couldn't sleep. He walked to the living room window and peered outside. The street was quiet. He tried to convince himself it was nothing, just his imagination, just an ordinary car. Yet when he turned back, a shadow behind the bushes across the street caught his eye. The figure was tall, standing perfectly still, staring directly at his house. Ben's heart pounded in his chest. He shifted the curtain slightly, trying to get a clearer view. The figure was still there, hidden behind the bushes. A surge of anger rose inside him. He flung open the front door and stepped outside. The cold night air hit him immediately. He moved quickly toward the edge of the street. "Who's there?" he shouted. No answer. Ben walked to where the figure had been, but all he found were empty bushes. No footprints. No signs of anyone having been there. He scanned the quiet street, looking up and down. Only darkness and silence greeted him. Unease gnawed at him as he returned inside. He locked the doors, secured the windows, and took a deep breath. When he turned, he saw Coda. The dog was no longer hiding behind the sofa. He stood in the middle of the room, ears perked, head slightly tilted. His eyes were no longer empty. They locked onto Ben, alert and attentive, a look Ben hadn't seen since they were reunited. Coda could sense Ben's anxiety. He knew danger was out there. Their bond, once fractured, was beginning to mend. Though Coda didn't approach, his vigilant presence was enough to calm Ben. "Thank you, buddy," Ben whispered, feeling a surge of emotion. Ben's curiosity shifted into urgency. He had to find out what had really happened to Coda. He walked to the phone table and grabbed his old contact book. He dialed a former K9 unit partner. "Mike, it's Ben. I need your help." Mike, startled to hear Ben's voice, quickly responded warmly. "Ben, it's been a long time. What's going on?" "I've got Coda back," Ben said. But he's in bad shape. I need to know who his second handler was. I need everything you have on him. Why did he give Coda up? Where is he now?" There was a long pause on the other end. "Ben," Mike's voice was hesitant, "this isn't just about a new handler. There's something complicated here. Lots of rumors. The handler's name is Collins. He's ambitious, but also known to be harsh with his dogs. I can send you his files." "Do it," Ben replied. "Send them to my email." After hanging up, Ben looked at Coda. "Collins," he whispered. "I'll find out what he did to you, buddy. I promise." Ben stared at his computer screen. A new email from Mike had arrived with an attachment titled Collins Case. His hands trembled as he opened the document. What he read made his blood boil. The files contained internal police reports, disciplinary records, and complaints from other officers. Collins, Coda's second handler, wasn't just problematic. He was a man obsessed with control, using brutal training methods rooted in fear and physical punishment. Ben read line after line detailing how Collins was often seen yanking his dogs forcibly, kicking them, and shouting at them. One report described a colleague witnessing Collins striking Coda with a baton after the dog failed to obey commands due to exhaustion. This explained Coda's fear, the deep trauma he carried. Coda hadn't been abandoned because he was useless. He had been abandoned because he was broken. Anger surged through Ben. He looked at Coda, lying on the carpet, still fragile, but no longer cowering in the corner. "I understand now, buddy," he whispered. "I understand." As Ben reflected, a sound from outside the window caught his attention. The familiar thump of a rubber ball bouncing along the street. The same ball he had given Coda years ago. Ben's heart raced. He knew instantly, it was a provocation. Suddenly, Coda stiffened. His ears pricked up, and a low growl rumbled from his throat. This was not a growl of fear, but a warning, a protective instinct. Coda moved slowly toward the window, eyes sharp, tail trembling with tension. Ben rose and approached the window. In the darkness beyond, he saw a figure walking away from his house. It was Collins, the same man from the shelter, the same shadow in the bushes. He had returned, determined to make Coda remember in the cruelest way possible. Coda returned to Ben's side and sat down. The growl did not cease. It was the old Coda's voice, the voice filled with courage and loyalty. He was no longer afraid. He was angry. He no longer saw Ben as a stranger, but as his, someone he must protect. The next morning, Ben felt not only alert but also furious. He knew Collins was toying with him, trying to shatter the fragile peace he had just restored. He glanced at Coda, now lying beside the sofa, eyes wary. "He's trying to scare you, buddy," Ben whispered, "but he won't succeed." Ben picked up the phone and called the police station. He reported the strange events he had experienced, the suspicious car, the figure watching his house, and the bouncing rubber ball. Yet the officer on the line sounded skeptical. "Mr. Walker, we understand your concern, but that's not sufficient grounds to launch an investigation. We will note your report and send a patrol if anything suspicious occurs." Frustrated, Ben hung up. They didn't understand. They didn't understand that this wasn't a random incident, but a deliberate threat aimed directly at Coda. He realized he had to protect Coda himself. In the following days, the terror escalated. Ben discovered footprints in his backyard. A newspaper was delivered to his house, cut and arranged to spell a threatening message, "He's mine." Ben cleaned up the footprints, crumpled the newspaper, and threw it in the trash. Coda remained close, his shadow no longer fearful, but vigilant, a silent shield for Ben. One night, as Ben prepared for bed, he heard an unusual sound from the kitchen. He rushed over and found the back door slightly ajar. His heart sank. He grabbed a flashlight, turned it on, and scanned the darkness. No signs of an intruder. Yet on the dining table lay a small pouch containing a torn dog collar, the old K9 collar Coda had worn, which should have remained in the closet. Beneath it was a note. "He doesn't deserve you. He makes you suffer. I'll help you, Ben." It wasn't just a threat. It was a trap. Ben knew Collins was trying to provoke him. But to what end? He realized he had to uncover Collins' true intentions immediately. That night, Ben removed the pouch and brought Coda to his bed. For the first time, Coda jumped up, curling at Ben's feet, resting his head on his lap. Their bond had returned, stronger than ever. Ben couldn't sleep. He knew they were dangerously close to Collins. He could strike at any moment. Morning arrived, but Ben felt no relief. He hadn't slept, and neither had Coda. The dog was restless, eyes constantly scanning the door, ears pricked for every sound. Ben knew Collins was no longer playing games. He wasn't just trying to scare them. He wanted Coda back. Suddenly, an idea struck Ben. He needed to awaken Coda's memory, not just through touch and voice, but through action. He had to make Coda remember who he truly was. Ben clipped on Coda's leash. "Come on, buddy," he whispered. "It's time to get back to work." He didn't take Coda to their usual park. Instead, he drove them to their old training ground outside the city, a wide field dotted with obstacles and worn poles. As they arrived, Coda hesitated. The air carried the scent of earth and long-forgotten memories. "Sit," Ben commanded, using the familiar order. Coda didn't move. Ben repeated it patiently, pointing to the ground beside him. Slowly, Coda lowered himself into a sit-still tense. Ben went through basic commands: stay, follow, even search. Coda's responses were slow, hesitant, as if his muscles had forgotten how to move. Ben didn't give up. He continued, speaking softly, praising every small success. Hours passed. Gradually, Coda began responding. He leapt over low obstacles, followed Ben with growing confidence, even barked at commands. But this bark wasn't of fear. It was deep, alert, full of vigilance. The soldier's spirit, locked away by trauma, was resurfacing. As they rested, Ben felt that familiar sensation, being watched. He looked up. On a distant hill, a figure stood still. Collins. He didn't approach. He just watched, a cruel smile etched on his face. Ben ignored him. He knew Collins wouldn't come close in an open field. He would wait for the perfect moment, when they were vulnerable. But Ben wasn't afraid. He was no longer alone. Beside him, Coda sat, eyes locked on the same figure, ready, alert. Their bond had returned, stronger than ever, forged by the threat looming over them both. And deep down, they both knew, the final confrontation was approaching. Ben and Coda returned home. Fear no longer gripped them. Instead, they felt a mission. They knew, tonight or the next, Collins would come. Ben left the living room lights on, leaving the front door unlocked. Coda lay beside the sofa, his vigilant eyes never blinking. As the night deepened, around 2 a.m., Ben heard a sharp knock at the front door. He didn't move. Neither did Coda. The knock came again, louder this time. "Ben! Open the door!" A voice roared from outside, filled with rage. It was Collins. Ben took a deep breath. "Don't be afraid, buddy," he whispered to Coda. "It's time." Ben walked to the door and opened it. Outside stood Collins, his face twisted with hatred. "I know he's there," Collins said, pointing at Coda, who was standing behind Ben. "Give him to me, Ben. He's mine. You can't train a dog like this." "He's not yours," Ben replied calmly. "He's mine. And I don't train him. I love him." "Love? Love doesn't work on a dog like this," Collins sneered. "I know how to train him. I know how to make him obey. You're just making him weak. Give him to me, or I'll take him." "You won't take anything," Ben said, his voice now as hard as steel. "This dog will never go back to the hell you made for him." Suddenly, Coda stepped forward. He stood tall in front of Ben, his back straight. A low growl rumbled from his throat. His eyes showed not fear, but anger. He was protecting Ben. Coda understood the threat, sensed Collins' hatred, and would not allow him to hurt Ben. Collins stepped back, surprised. He hadn't expected the dog he had abused to stand against him. He looked at Coda, then at Ben. "You think you've won?" he said, his voice filled with rage. "This isn't over. I will come back. And when I do, I will take that dog from you, and you'll see what I do to him." Collins turned and walked away. Ben closed the door, locked it, and looked at Coda. The dog still stood there, growling, only stopping when Ben reached down to stroke his head. "We won, buddy," Ben whispered. "We've won this round." That night, Ben couldn't close his eyes. Collins' words echoed in his mind. "I will come back." Ben knew the threat was no bluff. He reinforced every lock on the doors and windows, pushed a chair against the back door, and placed heavy furniture in front of the front door. He prepared Coda, making sure the leash and collar were within reach. Coda stayed close, his back pressed against Ben's legs, a calm, powerful presence. Around 4 a.m., the silence was broken by a faint sound, the creak of a hinge. Ben jolted awake. The sound wasn't from outside, but inside the house. He switched on the small lamp beside the bed. Coda was already standing. He stared toward the kitchen door, a low, furious growl rumbling from his throat. Adrenaline surged through Ben's body. Collins hadn't come through the front. He must have entered through the back door that Ben thought was secured. Ben rose slowly, grabbing a baseball bat from the corner. He moved silently toward the kitchen, Coda at his side. In the darkness, a figure loomed in the doorway, its large, menacing silhouette unmistakable. Collins. In his hand, he held a leash and other restraint. He had come for Coda. "I know you're here, Ben," Collins hissed, his voice full of deep hatred. "I just want what's mine." Coda stepped forward. He didn't wait for Ben's command. He moved like a soldier trained to protect. His growl erupted into a sharp, commanding bark that shattered the night's silence, signaling the impending danger. "No, Coda! No!" Collins shouted in shock. "You're not a loyal dog. You're mine." Collins lunged forward, hand outstretched toward Coda's collar. But he didn't realize, this Coda was no longer the scared dog he once knew. Coda was no longer afraid. He was angry. He was a living soldier. Suddenly Coda struck, not with blind rage, but with deadly precision, the same discipline honed over years of training. He knew exactly what to do. Coda struck, not with biting, but with trained precision. Using the weight of his body, he slammed Collins to the floor. Collins hit the tile with a loud thud, his leash and restraints falling from his startled hands. Coda pressed his full weight against Collins' chest, head lowered, growling triumphantly. He didn't injure Collins. He merely incapacitated him. Ben moved quickly. He grabbed the leash Collins had brought and bound the man's hands behind his back. Collins thrashed, but it was useless. He hadn't anticipated the dog he abused would turn against him with such intelligence. "You cheated." Collins spat. "The dog should have been afraid of me." "There's no cheating," Ben replied. "You were just too blind to realize that love is stronger than fear." Ben picked up the phone and called the police. "There's an intruder in my home," he said calmly. "He's been subdued. I need assistance." Minutes later, the flashing lights of police sirens lit up the street. Officers entered, and were astonished to see Collins tied on the floor, pinned by a highly trained German shepherd. Ben explained the situation. The officer, recognizing Ben, nodded. "We'll take care of it, Ben," he said. As the police led Collins away, the man glanced back, his eyes filled with hatred for Ben and Coda. But Coda didn't flinch. He simply stared calmly, as if already knowing the outcome. That morning, after the police had left and the sky brightened, Ben sat on the living room sofa. He stroked Coda's head, the dog now resting peacefully beside him. Coda lifted his gaze to meet Ben's eyes. No more anxiety. No more fear. Only loyalty and love. Coda licked Ben's hand, then rested his head on his lap. Their journey had ended. Coda was no longer broken, and Ben was no longer lonely. They were a team, a family, reunited. This house, once empty, now felt full of love and memories. And amidst it all,